I'm running late making this video. That's not entirely out of the ordinary for me, but even then I'm running very late making this video. It's got to be out in 2 days and I've only just finished writing the script. Why am I so late? Because I can't stop making shapes. I spent a long time with shapes on my wishlist before I finally picked it up. I like the idea of solving puzzles, building a factory to make the shapes I needed and then delivering them, but at the same time I just wasn't sure how engaging it'd be. Plus I'd had some bad experiences with similar games in the past, nothing earth-shattering, I just always got bored quickly. Mindustry had the most promise of all of the ones I'd previously tried, being a combination of factory game and tower defense, but it just felt so repetitive I didn't want to continue with it, and if being part of my favourite genre wasn't going to save it, why would a pure factory game be any better? More often than not, factory games are mixed with some form of survival. Factorio is widely considered to have made the genre popular, along with titles like Satisfactory, but I just don't enjoy either of them. Having to walk around gathering dozens of resources just to make a single belt, let alone any of the more complex structures, bores me to no end, and I quickly lose interest in playing. It's made even worse with the addition of combat. I just don't ever want to be fighting monsters in my factory games, but even without that, the unbearably slow pace would put me off regardless. The puzzle mixers are much more my speed, with all my favourite Zachtronics games having a factory style. They also tend to have some great theming, which can help string me along in the times when I'm struggling with a solution, with Opus Magnum's alchemical world being a particular favourite. Letting me just experiment with any component to get the outcome I want is exactly how I want to spend my time, but there's always some limit which ends up getting in the way. More often than not, it's a space restriction, and while of course there's always ways to work around them, it completely breaks my personal workflow when it comes to finding my answers. When presented with an issue, I like to find my solution as quickly as possible in whatever way works. I'll start by identifying the problem, then seeing where I want to be at the end, and working my way backwards. Sometimes that's a huge undertaking, with a convoluted mess of steps, or at least it'll seem that way. Once you've got what you need though, a lot of the stress is gone. After you've got a solution, you can look for the efficiencies, those little things you can trim, the steps that aren't necessary, everything you can do to make your job easier and quicker, and that's what I love about pure factory games. The purest of factory games simply give you the tools, a puzzle, and set you free. Without the restrictions to building, you can do whatever you want to find your solution. Without the space constraints, your factory can take up as much space as it needs to, giving you all the area you need to experiment. You can make a terribly inefficient solution, a factory which will take a week to make a single piece, but once you know how to do it, you can work out where to cut, where to duplicate, and where your bottlenecks are. With shapes being my entry into the genre, it's only natural it'd be my favourite. I was, however, kind of worried going into its sequel for a few different reasons. For one, the move to 3D left me unsure how the gameplay itself would change. Would it be more akin to those survival-style games I don't like, or Infinifactory, which, while I prefer, still isn't my cup of tea? That particular fear was assuaged quickly though, with the gameplay still essentially functioning on a 2D plane, with the new dimension functioning more as extra layers on top. Stacks of 2D puzzle solving on top of one another. It took me a while to wrap my head around, but once I did, and especially after unlocking the third layers, the extra dimensionality just gave me even more space to experiment with my solutions. The larger fear I had though was that it just wouldn't be that good. I played a lot of other factory games in between the original and this sequel, and while I hadn't enjoyed any of them quite as much, part of me had started to think that I was actually in love with some made-up version of the game. Not truly shapes, but more the memory of shapes, the idea of shapes. I worried then that the sequel would prove me right, and not just give a lackluster experience, but tarnish the enjoyment I'd found from its prior incarnation. I'm glad to say though, I was completely wrong. Shapes 2 is truly fantastic, even in this current early access state, and it surpasses not just the original, but every other factory game I've tried. There's so much content that I haven't even touched yet, the hexagon maps, the hard mode, the entire electrical programming suite, and all of this on top of the best factory game I've played. I've already talked about how much I like the addition of layers, and I love the new space theming too. It doesn't really do anything, but it provides just a bit of spice to the game, though I do think the plain grey of the original made things a little easier to parse. I think my favourite new feature though is also one I completely ignored for a while, the train systems. At first I just didn't see the point. Over smaller distances, the space belts are perfectly fine to deliver all of your shapes with, so I just never bothered trying them. Once I started to make my shapes further and further away from the main hub though, the transport time started to become a significant issue, which is where the railways come into their own, and even more so once you upgrade to deliver your trains straight into the vortex. Watching thousands of shapes at once be launched through the air is an incredibly satisfying experience. My only real complaint is that while the railroads themselves are fast, they can only transport shapes in stacks of 1,000, which can take a really long time to make, but they've already announced that in the coming patch that'll be changing to make one of my most loved features even better. While Shapez 2 is my favourite factory title, for a first experience I could see it being a bit overwhelming, and that's where I'd like to recommend Beltmatic. I actually think Beltmatic is a much easier game to get into entirely because it's maths based. While making shapes eventually becomes quite intuitive, from an early age everyone has to learn maths, so the solutions are often a lot more obvious. A good grasp of powers definitely helps though. You'll only have to worry about getting to grips with the actual factory mechanics rather than also wrapping your head around the less obvious functions of stacking and combining shapes. I don't at all regret Shapez being my first real foray into the genre, but if I was going to suggest a first one to try, it'd probably be Beltmatic instead. I picked up the original Shapez largely on a whim, not at all realising how much it'd end up taking over my life. While I can't give it singular credit, I did a talk last year entirely about time management and finding ways to make your workflow more efficient, and these games helped me develop those skills further than I ever had before. I make templates for most things I do now, be it scripts for videos, design documents for games, or even the videos themselves, all with the aim of making the process of creating the things I love as easy as I can. That way I can focus on what I care about without worrying about how long an edit is going to take me, or how exactly to hit the word count I want. Factory games give me a feeling like no other genre out there, because I feel like I come out of them better equipped for real life. The constant loop of problem identification, puzzle solving, iteration, and efficiency finding all helps train me to be more productive in my day-to-day existence. They honestly make me feel like a better person after I finish one, or they would if I didn't become a complete hermit and disappear for weeks at a time when I start a new one. At least I don't have to worry about that now that I'm finished with Shapez 2. Although it turns out there is a game by the Beltmatic devs called Beltex, which uses hexes instead of squares, and plus there's that update for Shapez 2 coming out in July that I'm looking forward to, and then there's blah blah blah.
Special thanks to my patrons, Justin Wood, Hobbs, and Koopy Vegeta. You can join my patrons at patreon.com/Holden Gatsby, check out my TikTok and Twitter at Holden Gatsby, and follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Holden Gatsby. Don't forget to subscribe to all of my channels. If you want more, you can watch my last video now, but if not, then thanks for sticking around. Bye.